Thank you, Safika and Dr. Polly, for your very valuable contributions to the conference, and what a great start. We're so excited to have you all here with us. I am just confirming that all our panelists are here with us, and I think that's the case. So we can get started with the first panel of the day. So my name is Catalina Lopez. I am the director of the Aquatic Animal Alliance at Aquatic Life Institute. And today I want to welcome you to the session that we have titled Reduce, where we will be talking about strategies and campaigns around the world to reduce the number of animals in the seafood system. Some housekeeping reminders for everybody. So the audience is muted upon entry and you have your cameras off, but you can post your questions in the Q&A box and we will try to answer all your questions at the end. Every session is being recorded, as you can see, and will be made available to the public after the conference. We expect respectful and productive discussions, and we have zero tolerance for harassment or discrimination of any kind in our conference. This session is 1 hour and 25 minutes long, and we have 4 amazing panelists with us today. I will briefly introduce them before they start sharing their amazing work with us. So first we have Amelia Cookson, who is a campaigner on industrial aquaculture for feedback. We have Ita Sualia, who is the director of the People, Fish and Forest Indonesia, and also a PhD student from the University of Queensland. We have Nathalie Gill, president of Sea Shepherd Brazil. And finally, Brian Kateman, who is the president and founder of the Reducetarian Foundation. So if everyone is ready, we can start with Amelia. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, that's fine. Let me share my screen.
Perfect. Go ahead.
Okay. There you go. Is that sharing okay?
That's perfect.
Super. Okay. Well, firstly, great to see everyone here. So my name is Amelia, and I am an industrial aquaculture campaigner at Feedback. So today we're going to be discussing Feedback's recent research report into the Norwegian salmon farming industry. So this report was published earlier this year in January, alongside a coalition of West African and Norwegian organisations. The report reveals how the industry's appetite for wild fish to feed farm salmon is extracting nutrition and undermining livelihoods in West Africa. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so firstly, a little bit about Feedback. So we are a UK and Netherlands-based campaigning organisation focused on environmental and social justice within the food system. So our work covers topics such as sugar, industrial agriculture, food waste, circular food economies, and industrial fish farming. And our work covers both investigative research and campaigning alongside community outreach. But before diving into the Norwegian salmon farming industry solely, I want to place this within the broader context of aquaculture globally. So as I'm sure many of you on this call will be aware, aquaculture is the world's fastest growing food production system, and currently more than half the seafood we eat globally is farmed. So the sort of fish farming we focus on is salmon farming. So salmon are carnivores, meaning that they depend on wild fish in their diet. This comes in the form of fish meal and fish oil, also known as FMFO. So what's happening at a global scale is that annually, 1/5 of the global marine catch is being used to create FMFO, the bulk of which goes towards the aquaculture industry. And much of this wild fish tends to be caught in the global south. So what we're seeing is wild fish such as sardines, anchovies, and herring, which also provide nutritious food to millions of people around the world, are instead being used to create FMFO to feed farm salmon. Okay, so now turning our attention to Norway. So Norway is the world's biggest salmon farming country. Currently, more than half the farmed salmon we eat globally comes from Norway. And adding to this, they're also home to the world's biggest salmon farming company, Mowi, which had a record-breaking turnover of over 5 billion euros in 2023. But it's not just Mowi. This really is an industry dominated by large multinational companies across the supply chain. When it comes to Norway, 11 out of 20 of a global list of the top producers of farmed salmon are all Norwegian companies. So with this huge scale of the Norwegian salmon industry, their salmon also have a voracious appetite for wild fish. In our recent report, we calculate that 2 million tons of wild fish are extracted from the ocean each year to feed Norwegian farmed salmon. That's equivalent to a staggering 2.5% of the global marine catch. And that's just to produce fish oil to feed Norwegian farmed salmon. So we argue that what Norway claims is their blue revolution is in fact a blue empire, hence the report's title, which you can see on the slide. So this sort of industry is creating a new type of food colonialism, as fish from the global south are being extracted to feed farmed salmon in the global north, which is then sold at a premium. So where does this wild fish come from? So for the Norwegian industry, a proportion of this wild fish is coming from West Africa. So countries such as Mauritania, Senegal, and Gambia. They've become hubs for FMFO production. In fact, in the past decade, the number of factories in the region has gone from 5 to 50. And Mauritania in particular has become a major hub for FMFO production. It now actually sits within the top 10 global producers of FMFO globally. So in this slide, you can see the regional decline in Sardinella numbers over the years. This correlates with the same increase in FMFO factories as I showed in the previous slide. And one of the issues with this is that the fish that are targeted by the FMFO factories are migratory. So that means catches in, let's say, Mauritania impact fish populations in neighboring nations such as Senegal and Gambia. However, this also spreads inland, as Mauritania is also a key supplier of small pelagic fish to inland countries such as Mali, Cote d'Ivoire, and Nigeria. So essentially what we're seeing is the FMFO factories are swallowing up the region's fish, which were once abundant and a key accessible source of nutritious food to both coastal and inland communities. However, despite all of this, Norway's current ambition is to triple salmon production by 2050. This means that their demand for wild fish will also treble. So this has various issues for sourcing West African fish to feed Norwegian salmon. Firstly, starting with nutritional challenges. So we calculate that Norway's demand for West African fish oil is depriving up to 4 million people in the region of fish required to meet their annual nutritional needs. Next is the rising prices. So the demand for fish meal and fish oil is rising the prices in countries such as Mauritania for local fish. For example, Sardinella has gone from 25 cents a kilo to €1.50 a kilo in recent years, making the fish unaffordable to the local population. The decline in fish populations is also having negative impacts on traditional livelihoods that depend on them. So livelihoods such as fishmongers or small-scale fisheries. This leads to a lack of prospects, which is being attributed to increased migration. And particularly impacted by each of these are women. So the fish targeted by FMFO factories contain key micronutrients such as zinc, calcium, and iron. These are particularly important for women's health in West Africa, where more than half the female population suffer from anemia. Additionally, it's traditionally the women who sell and process the fish. However, the scarcity in fish is driving more and more women out of business. So what's being done about this? Well, in 2022, Norway published a development policy focusing on improving food security within international development policy. So the overall objective of this policy was is to fight hunger and stop global food insecurity. However, this policy is really full of contradictions if they want to keep to their ambitious growth target with their salmon industry, so to triple salmon production by 2050. Actually, in the forward to the strategy, Anne Twivnerai, the Minister of International Development, does acknowledge that whilst in sub-Saharan Africa, 70 to 80% of the population works in agriculture and fishing, paradoxically, these farmers and fishers represent the majority of the chronically hungry families. So whilst the government are pointing to the macro trends that is driving food insecurity in sub-Saharan Africa, they are still remaining silent on their role in creating the very conditions they say they want to improve. Then there are signs of corporates trying to take responsibility too, namely through the use of certifications and novel ingredients. So when it comes to certifications in a West African context, one particularly problematic aspect are fishery improvement projects, also known as FIPs. So these are multi-stakeholder initiatives with the stated aim of creating more sustainable fisheries. So, for example, companies with a vested interest in gaining access to high-quality West African FMFO will sign up to this FIP. Then you have novel ingredients, which is the creation of ingredients such as algal oils or insects to replace the use of wild fish in FMFO. However, at this stage, there's scant evidence that either of these solutions are improving the situation on the ground. So whilst the FIP is in operation in Mauritania, fish populations across the region are still declining. And despite the excitement of the industry around novel ingredients, the expectations are really not meeting up to the reality. So at this stage, both solutions are hot air and acting as a sustainability smokescreen, enabling the further growth of the industry under the guise that they're trying to become more sustainable. So in light of our findings, we are calling for Norwegian decision makers to halt the further growth in salmon farming, mandate genuine transparency throughout the supply chain, stop sourcing FMFO from locations where its production is exacerbating food insecurity, and ensure Norwegian companies' sourcing practices do not run counter to its own development policy. So to make sure our demands have been received, we sent an open letter to the Norwegian government calling for them to take action on our demands. This, as you can see on the slide, did get some industry news coverage. However, we're still waiting for a formal response from the Norwegian government. But in the meantime, our research has had some coverage in some BBC mainstream news on an article, as you can see on the slide, where they were talking about Norwegians feeling guilty where their wealth has come from industries such as oil and aquaculture. Our research has also featured an NGO report, and there was a recent survey showing that the reputation of Norway's salmon industry has never been worse. However, one challenge we do keep coming up against is the vast scale of the Norwegian industry, making it hard for a group of small campaigning organizations to really champion that narrative on food security. However, we're continuing our campaigning, and if you'd like to join us, please do get in touch. Thank you. I look forward to the other presentations.
Thank you so much, Amelia. That was very interesting. Thank you for sharing your work, and we hope that you receive a response from the industry soon, and the campaign can continue and move forward. So next up is Ita. Are you ready to share?
Yes, sure. Catalina, thank you. I will do share screen from my side.
Perfect.
Okay, can you see okay now?
Yes, perfect. Go ahead.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, and also good evening for all of the panelists, organizing committee, and also all participants. It is honors for PFF, People, Fish and Fishery, People, Fish and Forest Indonesia, to join the 5th Aquatic Life Conference. I'm Ita. I would like to share PFF work, especially in fisheries or shrimp and mangrove integrations, how these aquacultures in terms of the shrimp impacting for conservation's mangrove ecosystem. To begin with, allow me to introduce our organizations. We are a consultant company based in Indonesia. Mainly our work is to support shrimp industry, especially shrimp farming industry, to comply with ISC, Aquaculture Stewardship Council's certification, one of the eco label. We are conducting BIA, Biodiversity Impact Assessment, and also participatory social impact assessment. And we are currently doing the Blue Carbon project, the integrations between shrimp and mangrove in terms of the livelihood and also blue carbon trade under the voluntary scheme. And last but not least, we are conducting as well sustainability studies, especially related with the coastal ecosystem management. So I'm copying what Professor Pauli mentioned earlier, how aquaculture currently can suppress the production of the capture fisheries. It also happened in Indonesia over the past 10 years. The capture fisheries relatively stagnant, while the aquaculture is consistently increased in terms of production, even though in the last 2 years it become a decrease in terms of Indonesia production aquaculture. If we see that we have 11 fisheries management areas, mainly half of them, more than half of them, the status is now overexploited, with the main commodities is a tuna. So mainly Indonesia's waters overexploited due to high exploitations for the capture fisheries. That's one of the reason the government and also the countries rely on mainly on the aquaculture sectors. This is why shrimp become important for Indonesia. If we see at the global trade or the global productions, Indonesia is ranked 5th globally. It contribute about 12% the productions globally. And then in terms of the economic, it's contribute about 50% of the export revenue is come from the shrimp industry, and it employ about 2 million employment or laborers. So this is why this industry is big in terms of economic and also social because of contribution for the labor sectors. This is the story of development shrimp aquaculture in Indonesia. As we know that in 1980s in Indonesia, we have our government banned the bottom trawl for the fishing gears that it caused before the shrimp cultures. They harvest the shrimp, mainly the shrimp fries from the sea, and then put it into the pond. But since 1980s, the government banned the uses of the trawl. It's make development of hatcheries become increased because the ban of the trawl itself. And then in 2000s, In terms of the species, we imported faname, white leg shrimp, to be cultured in Indonesia. Mainly before 2000, main species was black tiger prawn. And this is how it looks like, the shrimp aquaculture in Indonesia, from around 800,000 hectares. 750,000 hectares are traditional, operated traditionally in mangrove ecosystem. Half in about 50,000 hectares semi-intensive. It located in the, some of them still located in the mangrove ecosystem. And then the few percentage, about 26,000 hectares is operated intensive, which is mainly behind the mangrove ecosystem. So this is how it looks like from the satellite imagery. And this is, I took the photos from the plane, how it looks like the traditional shrimp farming. We can see still some of the mangrove ecosystem inside the shrimp ponds. And this is the semi-intensive, while they mainly cut off or clear the ponds from the mangrove. And this is the right side is the intensive shrimp farming. It's totally non-mangrove at all because it use the pedal wheel normally, and also use the concrete ponds or a plastic layered pond. Despite of the high economic value and also high productions since 1980s, now we have decreased the production of the shrimp farming itself due to too intense. The previous used a lot of fertilizer, a lot of feed as well. So it makes now the 700,000 hectares, the shrimp farming become low productivity. We only can produce 80 until 100 kilogram per hectare per cycle. That's still the good value, but normally less than it. There's really a low productivity, even though the mangrove, a lot of mangrove converted to become shrimp ponds. And also environmental degradation due to habitat loss and also water pollutions, uses the organic pollution and also the chemical pollutions as the input from the shrimp farm. And this is outbreak, the earliest stages we experience for the early mortality syndrome, which is only 10 or 20 days of day of culture, it can die, make the post larvae of the shrimp. So the farmer have to flush out and stop the farming itself. And then we have the high production cost due to low productivity, not good the environmental condition, make many or inputs should be added into the shrimp farming practices. And still, even though the IoT been developed, but mainly still like 80% of shrimp farming in Indonesia still operated in the traditional way, still low technology adoptions. And then logistic infrastructures, because we are archipelagic countries, contribute to the production cost become higher as well. The climate change and also the extreme weather, it cause link to the disease outbreak as well. And also limited access to finance and market informations still make a challenges, where the long supply chains make the benefit from the farmer become lower because of many layers of the supply chain actors, for example, the middleman itself. So this is, I took the result of the research from Arifanti, how the mangrove ecosystem degraded. If we see that across the Indonesia, mainly mangrove ecosystem degradations caused by the shrimp farming. We can see the blue color in here in the pie chart. And also based on the map of the mangrove rehabilitations, from the potential 900,000 mangrove degraded mangrove to be rehabilitated, about 91% is located in the shrimp farming areas. Those make a reason for the PFF Indonesia to work to conserving mangrove, not only to replanting mangrove, but also how we combine between mangrove and also shrimp farming. And then the second issues as well about the greenhouse gases emissions. We know that a various number to produce 1 kilogram shrimp, it will emit it from 2.5 kilogram CO2 equivalent until 5. Even some research mention more, like 13 times of the shrimp production itself. So this is our current research to calculate how many emission in terms of the Faname or monodon or black tiger aquaculture system. And our current studies, the combinations to find the best model in which model of the mangrove ecosystem that can be integrated with the shrimp aquaculture. It's been ongoing 3 years cultures to combine between the shrimp pond that initially, if we since this is the 10 hectares of the shrimp pond, which is initially the mangrove was in the middle, and then due to the low productivity, we try to only rehabilitate. We try to only use 3 hectares of the ponds for the more intensive to increase the good aquaculture practices as well. And then we let the rest of the pond to be rehabilitated or to be naturally replanted by the mangrove and natural regeneration by mangrove itself. And then we found that the harvest amount is the same numbers of even higher compared to the previous one. Is double amount of the productivity, which is give us good impressions, which is we can convince the farmer it is a good way to combine between mangrove and also shrimp farming, because mainly we heard many complaint and also difficulties of the farmer if they have a mangrove inside their ponds. And then later on, perhaps next year, we can publish what is the best combination, how many % of mangrove, and then how many % of the shrimp pond can be managed in one pond that can have the ideal economically and also in terms of the carbon absorption. And for the practical solutions, we would like to suggest first for the extensive or traditional shrimp farming, please stop the mangrove conversions. And then we need to focus on to increase the low productivity to back to the mangrove to combine between the integration mangrove in shrimp farming. And also the last one for the rehabilitation effort, mangrove rehabilitation effort in Indonesia, especially to be integrated with the shrimp farmers, because mainly the location are in the shrimp farming. We cannot stay alone to be like the mangrove rehabilitation and here is the shrimp farming, but we have to combine those effort together. And then last but not least, for the semi-intensive and also intensive, since they have a high investment and also capital to be more efficient in terms of the feed and also for electricity, because these two source is the mainly for the greenhouse gases emission source. I think that's all from PFF side. Over to you, Catalina. Thank you. Look forward to have a discussion.
Thank you so much, Ita. That was fascinating. The data really shows the impact of the industry in your ecosystems. And yeah, it's really interesting the work we're doing. We're internally talking with our team, though we want to talk more with you later about collaborating. Great. So moving on to Nathalie. Nathalie, are you ready to share your screen?
Yes. Hello, everyone. Just a second. Can you all see my screen? Okay. Yes. So yeah, it's a pleasure to be here in this conference. My name is Nathalie. I am now leading Sea Shepherd Brazil. And I'm going to focus a bit on the perspective of the fishing industry in particular. And I always like to start the presentations with this image, which is something we easily forget when we decide laws, regulations, and everything. This is an image of the ocean as seen as a huge continent in the world. What is important for us to realize, actually, is that the ocean is completely interconnected. So for the marine life that live at sea, we're talking about actually one world for them, and everything that we do all around the world is affecting everything else. It is a huge ecosystem that we need to take into consideration here. Giving a bit of a step back, not only talking about aquatic life, but the importance actually of the marine ecosystem and aquatic ecosystem for life on Earth itself, right? We tend to also focus a lot on seeing the ocean as resources for us directly. Actually, the ocean has a huge ecosystemic role for life on Earth to continue to thrive. So first, it is our true lungs, right? We are very aware now that the ocean provides more than 50%. Sometimes some studies show 80% of everything, all oxygen that we breathe comes from the ocean. Of the 21% of oxygen that is stored in the atmosphere, historically more than 80% of it was produced by the ocean itself. So also it is our most important group of ecosystems. It is home to 94% of wildlife. It is huge, the importance the ocean has also in terms of the balance of biodiversity on Earth. And it is responsible for all the hydric, thermal, and also biological balance of Earth. So when we talk about climate change, so when we talk about El Niño, La Niña, and everything else, the ocean is playing a huge role also in all of those dynamics. And unfortunately, we're seeing in the world news today information such as the ocean has never been that hot, for example. And that also brings huge consequences in this whole balance on Earth. So we are in a moment of potentially a huge crisis. And all this machinery I was talking to you about, actually, it just continues operating if we manage to keep them balancing itself to thrive. If we keep the biodiversity equilibrated for it to continue operating for life on Earth to thrive. However, to make things really clear, when we talk about fishing, we tend to see fishing as an important commerce, an important trade and source of food for humanity. Well, in fact, it is also the largest ecocide in the world. We don't tend to realize that actually all the fish that we take out of the sea, they are wildlife that have their own responsibility, ecological responsibility, and they are actually we are actually, taking their role out of the sea when we remove fish from the sea. This is a picture that is really common to see all over the world. This was taken off the shore of France, and this was a discarded fish from a huge super trawler. It was a fish that doesn't have economical value, and they just discarded it to get, a more economically viable fish. So yeah, this is unfortunately the reality of how we are dealing with, or how we are actually engaging with the ocean nowadays. Some numbers, that is important to remember. Some of them were already mentioned here. So in terms of numbers of fish, which was done by a study from a UK NGO, if you count fish as, lives, we're talking about more than 90% of lives lost from fishing alone. If we put aquaculture in that context, it goes, almost 99% of lives lost every year for human consumption comes from aquatic life. And important to say that the fishing one, if we're talking about fishing, all of them are wildlife. All of them have the responsibility to ocean balance, and also to other lives that could be impacted by it, by the lack of food for them as well. 40% of them are bycatch, which means they didn't have intention to be caught. Most of them are discarded back at sea. 25% are used to feed animals. We saw here a number of 20% for agriculture, but we know also, 20% for agriculture, but also we feed, for example, chicken and even pets with food from the seas. So we are feeding, animals, if you talk about chicken and fish, to feed ourselves. So we're using them as a well, basically a middleman, let's say, a middle effort to take the calories out of what actually produce most calories in the ocean, which is algae and cyanobacteria and so on, and other types of plants, aquatic plants. And 20% is illegal. So 1 in 5 fish caught is actually caught illegally. And that comes with a lot of impacts from illegal fishing industry that we know are very damaging for the ocean. So things such as, for example, finding drift nets that have more than 70% of kilometers long. It is something that we can find in the fishing industry and the legal part of it. But also, for example, crew that are living lives that are close to slavery, really. And the trawling industry, it represents nowadays 1/4 of everything that we eat in terms of marine life in the ocean. And the bottom trawling itself, which is the most damaging technique of fishing there is, it destroys 50 times more land than, for example, deforestation in the world. So it is shocking. And also half of the bycatch comes from trawling alone. So we need to face that actually what we're talking about when we talk about fish and marine life in general is that we are talking about, how we say in social rights that, women's rights or Black people's lives, and depending on the location where you are in, you're talking about minority, majority, right? Majority of people that wants their rights and it should be treated as equal. The same thing is happening when we talk about animal life, that aquatic life is generally, they are much more behind in terms of their rights. And even in the way we are communicating about them, if you consider them as wildlife, I'm going to give an example of Brazil, that all wildlife in Brazil, they're protected from hunting if they are native. But when it comes to aquatic life, wildlife, they are treated as resources. It's a great supermarket, right? And even in the way we use our wordings for them. So seafood, like they are, just a food from the sea and not the actual animal that has other very important roles within their ecosystem. Or, as Daniel Pauli already mentioned, we calculate the fish killings by tons of animals being fished. So we don't even know if we see the official numbers, how many animals have been killed. We call about harvest when we are actually talking about fishing itself, like we're harvesting from a land that is going to grow again, right? And also calling them fish stocks when you calculate a population of fish. So the language is commercialized. The language itself is very derogatory, right? And so this is what I wanted us to open our eyes about, how much detached we are from what the fact is in terms of how we are treating the ocean and how we should be seeing the ocean as this fundamental source of life for us, but we are actually treating it as a source of death. Giving a perspective of Brazil, where we operate, and it shows the challenges of fishing in the global south. In Brazil, we half of the vessels, they don't register their fishing efforts nowadays, so we don't even know what they are actually fishing. Half of the fish populations that have completely unknown status, and the ones that we do have the status, we can see that actually 73% of the fish populations are already being overfished, and 67% are already overexploited. And of the vessels that operate in Brazil, only 14% needs to register their bycatch and make sure they are avoiding bycatch. So it shows how far it is for us to really understand the real impact that fishing industry is having towards the ocean. And bizarre situations like this one happens when you have a country that has so little information and so little transparency and traceability towards fishing. So, for example, a lot of people don't know, but Brazil is in fact the country that eats sharks the most, and not any other country in Asia, as people tend to believe. And why is that? Because Brazil became this huge laundry to shark finning, which still happens. People still kill sharks. About 75% of sharks are killed every year for the fins, but they are forced now to commercialize the carcasses. And the carcasses, they go to countries that still eat them. And Brazil is the largest one of them. So we are the largest consumer and the largest importer of sharks in the world. And that makes, for example, our tuna fleet fish more sharks than tuna nowadays. Well, if it goes like this, if we keep treating the ocean like this, in 2014, it shows, of course, this is a statistical study. If we don't do anything about that right now, we're talking about in 2014, the ocean collapsing, and all those amazingly important ecosystemic services that it provides to life on Earth will collapse also with it. So is it really worth it, what we're doing to the ocean? And I want to show these numbers because, you know, we've been, of course, here, I'm not talking so much about traditional fisheries. And of course, there will be always a part of fishing that is sustainable, you know, for people just to thrive in very particular areas that they're 100% dependent on fishing to survive. However, the majority of humanity can definitely reduce its consumption on fishing. It has to be now and it has to be urgent. And why is that? Because it's not really worth it for us to consider fish as the main source of food that we eat. We can see here that the representation of calories that comes from aquatic life for our the calories we eat every year is only 2%. The source of protein that comes from aquatic life for humanity is only 6% worldwide. When it comes to Brazil, for example, it's even lower, it's only 2%. Is it really worth it for us to do everything that we're doing, all the destruction we've been having with trawling, with illegal fishing, with industrial fishing, and even with the, you know, how it is with agriculture nowadays? Is it really worth it for us to just have 6% of protein, 2% of calories? It is really common for us to see fishing as a source of food security. And especially as more and more they are realizing that actually fishing, it is a short-term, dangerous impression that it's going to give food security to humanity when climate crisis gets worse and worse. It is actually going to be very quickly going to the verge of collapse if we depend on fishing to sort out our food sources in a time of collapse. It is important for us to actually think that production of plant-based diets is actually ideal. Well, this is just to give a perspective on why it is inefficient for us to think about fishing in the way we are consuming it right now for the future. And briefly, I'm going to talk about Sea Shepherd Brazil and how we're trying to operate towards all of this. We were founded by Captain Paul Watson. I'm here in Nuuk right now, where Captain Paul Watson is in jail, completely unjustly, for the protection of, guess what, not even fish, it's whales. We're still in a world that whales are being hunted for food, and completely illegally by countries that are already proven to be actually doing that operation illegally. And people that are trying to change this are now in jail. That's the reality of the world today, and that's what we need to urgently change. Important to say that Paul Watson is with some Sea Shepherds, so Sea Shepherd Brazil, Sea Shepherd France, still with him. Some others turned their backs on him, which is another unfortunate reality of the moment, that we still have NGOs deciding to move away from the urgency of changing the world as we need to right now. And I want to leave you guys with the message that really inspires Sea Shepherd Brazil to operate and that Paul Watson brings, which is the 3 laws of ecology. Before any conversations about economy, about people's livelihoods and money security, we need to think about actually the basics of the security of life on Earth, that we need to have an Earth that operates with the basic laws of ecology, which is we need to have biodiversity to thrive. Humans cannot live alone on this planet. We depend on all bacteria in our guts. We depend on bacteria in the soil. We depend on all other animals to provide us oxygen and all the equilibrium that we need to survive. The law of interdependence, that we need this exchange of ecosystemic services to keep us alive and thriving, and the law of finite resources, that when we remove fish from the sea, we see it as a resource, but we are taking this as a resource from other animals as well. And this has consequences, right? So we need to actually see a future that gives us the intelligence to live in harmony with the planet, with the whole ecosystem, first and foremost. Economics shouldn't be driving this. Short-term decisions shouldn't be driving this. And this is very, very important for us to think about our survival in the future. And the way we do it is to operate against destructive and illegal fishing, to operate on the defense of threatened species. We do a job in defending sharks and river dolphins in particular in Brazil, and also to create this change of perspective on people's minds so we really preserve and recover our ecosystems. And we do that with investigation and intelligence. We do that with very hard advocacy for the aquatic life in Brazil, and also to educate more and more people for a new worldview, which is actually very old. We used to live very much in connection to nature, and we knew our independence, our strong dependence on it, and we just lost it. We need to recover that back again urgently. And yeah, I would like to just finish with this phrase, which I like them a lot because it comes from an old indigenous proverb that, well, when the last tree is cut down, the last fish is eaten, the last stream of river is poisoned, only then we will realize that we cannot eat money. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Nathalie. Thank you for highlighting the urgency of this work and these conversations to happen at every level, and how really we are totally dependent of our oceans and the life in the oceans. Thank you so much. And I just want to remind everybody to please add your questions to the Q&A box, and we will share those questions with the panelists at the end of the presentations. And Brian, you're up. Do you want to try to share your screen?
Try is the perfect word. Let's see how it goes here. We want.
I think Livia is ready to support you with that, if not, so.
I will take the support, but I also can do it without the slides if that's an issue. Let me know.
Yep. Whatever you prefer.
If you can pull up the slides, let's give it a go. Why not?
Livia, can you try? Thank you.
All right, excellent. First of all, thanks so much to my co-panelists. Those were very informative and insightful presentations. And a huge applause, a literal applause to the organizers for putting this event on. It is no easy feat, so a huge kudos for making that happen. So I'm Brian Kateman. I'm president and co-founder of the Reducetarian Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization committed to reducing societal consumption of animal products in order to create a more sustainable, healthy, and compassionate world. And what I want to do is tell you a little bit about how the Reducetarian movement got started and why I think it's a useful framework for having conversations around ending factory farming, reducing societal consumption of animal products and animals, including aquatic animals. Next slide, please. So I grew up in Staten Island, New York, and if you're familiar with the United States and familiar with New York, you will know that Staten Island does not have a reputation for being a plant-based mecca by any stretch. But one of the parts I loved about growing up in Staten Island was that there was a lot of nature. And as a kid, I spent a lot of time sort of living in the natural world, hanging out in parks and going on walks and trails, and so on. Next slide, please. And so by the time I got to college, I was sort of your typical card-carrying environmentalist. I would tell people that they should recycle, that they should compost, that they should walk instead of drive. Next slide, please. But it wasn't until much later in college that I made the connection to food. I was actually on a flight on my way to present some undergraduate environmental research. I was eating a hamburger, and a friend of mine who knows that I was interested in philosophy and ethics handed me a book that he was reading for a class called The Ethics of What We Eat by Peter Singer and Jim Mason. And this was a really pivotal moment for me because despite being very interested in environmental issues, like many environmentalists who exist today, I really didn't know all that much about how the food system impacted issues that I cared about, some of which the speakers today have already touched upon. Everything from habitat loss and biodiversity loss to climate change to reductions in availability of natural resources like fresh water and so on. And so it was a really important moment for me, not only understanding how it is that the way we raise animals for food impacts the environment, but also our health, and of course, the welfare of animals and the people that are involved in those systems. Next slide, please. And so I was the kind of person who wanted to live a life who was that was in line with his values, but I really did grow up in an environment where I mostly ate fast food. I ate Burger King and McDonald's, and when it was some kind of celebration, we would go to Red Lobster. When I went to school, I would have fish sticks, and basically animal products were at the center of my diet to the max. And so, this was a very difficult thing to do to consider cutting back on animal products or even going vegetarian or vegan. And I want to take a moment to empathize with this experience because I'm very inspired by the passion of this group of people who recognize that we do need to reduce societal consumption of animal products at a minimum. But I also want to acknowledge how difficult that is for the average person, including individuals who are living in high-income countries. And by difficult, I don't mean that it's sort of actually difficult. I just mean that because of our relationship to food, it makes it quite challenging. I was like the average person living in a high-income country, where for me, the way I made food choices was based on taste, convenience, and price, and of course, social norms, what other people are eating around me. And so despite what did feel like a Herculean effort, I did make a lot of progress in significantly cutting back on the amount of animal products that I consumed, and I aspired to go all the way to be vegetarian or vegan. Next slide, please. But despite this, I definitely was not perfect about it. So, for example, I remember one Thanksgiving, and you have to imagine like my family around the table, and I've taken every possible vegetable that I can, and I've stacked it as high as I can on my plate. But the turkey keeps going around the table, and my dad, who is a really lovely guy, started sort of cajoling me, and he was sort of encouraging me. Come on, Brian, it's Thanksgiving, and partake. Your aunt put all this effort into making the turkey, and it's delicious. Just have a bite. And I remember taking this piece of turkey and popping it in my mouth. And as soon as I did, my sister said, "Oh, I thought you were a vegetarian, Brian." And I remember not necessarily having the words to describe how I felt, but I remember how I felt. And the way that I felt was irked because I wasn't like the average American at the time who was eating 220 pounds of meat a year. I wasn't perfect, but I was only eating, let's say, a couple pounds of meat a year. And I was surrounded by people who really weren't trying at all. And so to pick on a person who wasn't perfect, but was doing pretty good relative to others in their decision making around food didn't really seem to make a lot of sense to me. Next slide, please. And so, I had a couple of experiences where I found myself kind of being poked at, not only by omnivores, but also some vegans who were frustrated that I wasn't 100% vegan at the time. And so I didn't want to get caught in this sort of semantic trap. And so I just did what I think a lot of people would do. I Googled, like, what is a person who, overwhelmingly eats plant-based foods, but occasionally finds themselves in situations where they're eating animal products. And many of you will be familiar with these words: semi-vegetarian, flexitarian, mostly vegetarian. They describe people who primarily eat plant-based foods with the occasional inclusion of animal products in their diet. And at the time, that did describe my diet. Next slide, please. But when I was really kind of stepping back, I mean, I'm thinking about the people in my life, my friends and family, and I wasn't very optimistic that they were ever going to be flexitarians or mostly vegetarians. These were people who I would have been happy if they occasionally had a fruit or vegetable in their diet. I would have been ecstatic if they had cut back 10% or 20%. And in thinking, more, around the United States and even and globally, particularly in high-income countries where people are eating way too many animal products, if we could get a sort of large number of people to cut back by a small percentage, that might even make a greater difference than getting a small number of highly committed people to go vegetarian or vegan. Next slide, please. And so, it may not seem like my colleague and I, who were interested in this topic, spent too much time thinking of a word to describe a person who had made the decision to cut back on animal products, but we did. And the word that we came up with was Reducetarian. And a Reducetarian is that. It's a person who's decided to cut back on the amount of meat, fish, eggs, and dairy that they consume. And it unites vegans and vegetarians and flexitarians and omnivores because it emphasizes that we all recognize that we need to reduce our animal product consumption as much as possible. And I was excited about the idea of having a term that emphasized our commonality rather than our differences, both because I find that intellectually beautiful, but also because I think consequentially that would create a world with less suffering in it, which is my primary motivation for the work that I do. Next slide, please. So what I want to do now in the last couple of minutes here is tell you about the 4 tenets of the Reducetarian framework. And again, I think this is a useful framework for this conference and really for any approach to trying to reduce the amount of animal products that we are consuming and producing on both an individual and societal level. The first tenet is that it's not all or nothing. I understand why we have this mindset, given the nature of the way that we raise animals for food, but it is important to recognize that this really is a spectrum, and eating significantly fewer animal products is certainly better than eating a significantly increased amount. And so I think it's important to recognize that a lot of people really are quite just quite intimidated by the idea of cutting back animal products entirely, especially at first. And if we can emphasize that every single plant-based meal is an opportunity to celebrate a more sustainable, more healthy, and compassionate world, I think that's something that's worth acknowledging. I can tell you a quick story. A couple of years ago, my now wife and I were planning our wedding, and I remember calling my mom to tell her that that we had decided to make all the food at our wedding vegan. And I could feel the tension on the phone of my poor mom. And she finally, summoned the courage to ask me, but Brian, what are the people who don't identify as vegan going to eat? And at the time, I didn't realize how profound this question was, but it's so profound because it implies that in order to eat vegan food, you have to be vegan. And this is a very, I would argue, corrosive and dangerous mentality. It needs to be understood and celebrated and known that vegan food is for everyone. No matter the current diet that someone is pursuing, incorporating more plant-based foods in one's diet is very much something to celebrate. Next slide, please. And again, just to reiterate, I firmly believe that if we're going to create a world in which fewer animals are raised for food, it's going to require a participation from a significant number of people. And if we just look at the basic math of this, if we can get, the average person who eats 200 pounds of meat in, let's say, high-income countries to cut back by 5 or 10 or even 20%, I really believe that that will make a much greater difference than getting, let's say, 1 or 2% of the world to cut out animal products entirely. As much as I wish it were much easier to create more vegans in the world. Next slide, please. The next motivation, the next tenet of the Reducetarian framework is this idea that incremental change is worthy of celebration. It's perfectly fine for people to go at this slowly. Some people will hear some information about the problems with, for example, farming fish or procuring fish from our oceans, and they may be inspired to cut out animal products entirely. But for some others, it may just be the start of a seed that is planted. You know, about a decade ago, I started going to therapy, which I recommend for anyone, but particularly for advocates who are frustrated with the state of the world. And one of the things you learn in therapy is that you can't force people to do what you want. This is a very difficult thing to accept. You can't force your friends, you can't force your partners, you can't force people to do what you want. All you can do is show up in the world and do the best that you possibly can to plant seeds and be as strategic as possible in how you communicate information. And if you notice that people are making changes in their life, even if it's slow at first, that's definitely something to be celebrated. Next slide, please. The third tenet, oh, forgive me, I'm going to go through this very fast. This idea of incrementalism applies not only to individuals, such as through these strategies represented here, like Meatless Monday and Weekday Vegetarian and Vegan Before 6, or of course, Vegetarian or Vegan. Next slide, please. But also to our work as a society. I was so inspired by all of our speakers today so far who are pursuing all of these different strategies to advance this mission. And I know we'll hear from others represented in some of these tactics. And it's important to recognize, no matter your ideal vision for the food system, change is going to be incremental. And so we're going to have to rely on all of these different strategies and celebrate these incremental wins along the way, knowing that whatever ultimate goal we might have is not going to happen overnight. Next slide, please. The third is that all motivations matter. We've heard some motivations referenced today, everything from animal welfare, animal rights, environmental considerations, human health, worker rights, food justice, so on. All of these motivations matter. The one upside of having a food system that is so destructive in every single way is that it invites people from different perspectives to be excited about changing or ending the way that we raise animals for food. Next slide, please. And I want to finish with this as being the last slide here, with just a note that we are all very much on the same team. And this is the last and I think most important tenet of this Reducetarian framework. We all come to this from different perspectives. We all have different motivations. We all have different diets. And that's okay. And that's okay because as we've sensed from our previous speakers, the world is really in a dire situation right now. And though we may have different ultimate visions for the food system, for some that may be a vegan world, for others that may be a world that has significantly reduced consumption of animal products, what I can tell you is that whatever your ideal vision for the food system is, the road to achieving that food system is one in which factory farms do not exist, and we have significantly reduced societal consumption of animal products. And what I can also say is that that is going to be extremely difficult. I cannot guarantee you that we will ever end factory farming. I cannot guarantee you that we will ever reduce societal consumption of animal products. And I think it's important for us to hold on to hope and to do the best that we possibly can to reduce suffering. But along the way, we cannot lose sight of the fact that there is a relatively few number of people in this world who care about these issues. And no matter how our diets or perspectives or visions for the world may diverge, I am filled with unending love and gratitude for everyone in this movement that is focused on advancing this shared movement. And I encourage all of us to hold that perspective in our mind as we continue to work. So thank you so much for listening to my presentation. And I very much appreciate the opportunity for being here.
Thank you so much, Brian, for sharing your perspectives and your journey to reducing the amount of animals in your diet and, ensuring that message is shared. I think also our approach as Aquatic Life Institute is to also kind of meet people, industries, communities, policymakers where they're at, to advance in different ways with different strategies, but to ensure that these topics start getting talked about. It's not all or nothing because there's so much nuance to the seafood industry and its impacts that we need to be mindful of the flexibility needed. So we resonate a lot with your message and with everyone else's message today. I think they show that there's different avenues, like you mentioned, of guiding us towards change in different parts of the world and in different conditions. So maybe Amelia and Nathalie can join us again with their cameras, and we can maybe share some questions from the audience and kind of to bring more perspectives, different perspectives from how you all think. So I think my first question to all of you is something that we face quite often in our work at Aquatic Life Institute, and it's that most of the conversations related to animal agriculture, around the world really are centered around the land-based animal agriculture industry. So, I would like to hear from all of you if you're comfortable. How do you think we can increase public, political, and media awareness on, the scale of environmental, animal welfare, and community harms of the seafood industry that we've talked today? This can be in the context that you work in, or, a wish list of what you would like to see in the world. So I don't know, maybe Amelia, do you want to start?
Yeah, a wish list. How long can we go on for? No, so I think definitely from a feedback perspective, as I mentioned, we focus a lot on the feed that is fed to carnivorous fish when as part of aquaculture. And I think a big part that we were actually discussing this morning is that I think like the lack of knowledge that quite like carnivorous fish like salmon, for example, eat wild fish. So I think the sort of gaining a knowledge, like maybe we were saying like having clear labeling, so as well as like the origin of where the fish comes from. It's also like it was also fed these fish as well. I think could be help fill in the gaps. But yeah, it wouldn't just be a labeling thing. I think like as well as public awareness, it would have to be sort of regulating industries as well, and sort of just calling for more transparency from would be a big thing as well for us. So yeah, I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Yes, I think there's such a disconnection of people and the oceans and what they consume from the oceans. And sometimes when I talk about these issues with people that aren't at all involved in advocacy, I kind of like related to like, well, farming salmon is similar to farming lions. Like that would be a really bad idea for many reasons, but it's like hard for people to make the connection to see that, yeah, salmon are very high in their food chain in the ocean. So why are we farming these animals that require so many calories to go to the final consumer, right? So it's kind of like finding that sweet spot of educating the public on what really goes on in the seafood industry, because it's so removed from everyday lives. I mean, land-based agriculture is already so removed from us now that we all live in cities, but even more from the oceans. Ita, maybe you want to take a stab at this question?
Sure. Yes, I think responding your question about the how to increase the awareness, based on my experience in the seafood supply chains, the market educations and market awareness is very important, because, for example, us as the farmer will follow what the market requires. So having kind of the eco-label that currently increasing, I know from the Sophia introduction, as well the Aquatic Life doing kind of the benchmarking, I think it's a really good step to have kind of, because a lot of eco-label, even though in aquaculture still not many compared to forests or other crop agricultures, the eco-label, but having kind of the standardized, for example, at the moment, only ASC that asking for how many kilojoule per one cycle of shrimp in producing of shrimp. So having those kind of standardized, this will be great. And also the main thing is the market and then customer awareness, because the farmer will follow what the customer asks, what the market asks. For example, the countries like European more strictly in environmental aspect, then Indonesia as the producer countries will follow what the buyers, what the country buyer will required, and also the government regulations. For example, currently in our country, the eco-label still voluntary. I think at the global level as well has something certain kind of the mandatory, for example, the environmental restriction for the water pollution, for example, that will be great. It will be high impact enforcing the producer as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ita. Yeah, it's so important to have data. And I think that's always a challenge in the global south, that we don't really understand the impacts of the industry because we don't have that data. We don't have maybe a historic information of how our ecosystems have changed due to industry. So that poses a challenge, but it is very encouraging that, you know, organizations such as yours are gathering this data and creating this baseline to be able to move forward and make positive changes. So I think that's also very important. Research is a key aspect to creating this positive change in our countries and our industries. Nathalie, do you want to share your perspective with us?
Yeah, I think I'm going to add to some of the conclusions here. Yeah, you mentioned, for example, that, you know, salmon farms could be equated to, for example, lion farms. And, you know, the same happens with fishing as well. That catching a tuna in the middle of the ocean, it is like catching a panther in the forest. And we do in the worst way possible, you know, with huge nets that destroy the forest itself massively and get many, many other types of animals within, you know, the net. Imagine like a net destroying, literally like devastating forests. That's what we are doing in the ocean. So, you know, to answer your question, I think the main challenge, but also the main opportunity for us is how can we educate people in closing this massive gap in the way we communicate about aquatic life and land life. I think that's the first step, you know, to make humans realize even the language you use. We do that so well in many other aspects that we are trying to fight for in the social sphere and starting to do that also on the environmental sphere, that we should take care in the wordings we use and even the measurements we do. You know, Daniel Pauly mentioned some of them. For example, when we study populations of fish, we actually study what we call maximum sustainable yield, which means basically how much can we retrieve from this population to make it still be big enough to keep providing us year on year. So the calculation itself is not about the health of the population. It's about how can it keep providing to us, right? So all of those visions, and also the calculation of population is done by what we catch in the fishing nets, for example. So all of that really impacts, makes very hard for us to make a huge change in the way we're going to engage with and protect those aquatic life. So first and foremost is how can you actually put ocean culture the right way in schools everywhere in the world? How can children learn about our dependence on the ocean being not just, oh yeah, it provides us fish, or, you know, it receives all the shit that we produce in our economical system, but actually to understand that the ocean is fundamental for us to survive and everything should trickle down from it, I guess.
Yeah, and you know, like you say, the basic of it is like we don't even talk about individuals when we talk about fishing or aquaculture. We talk about tons or harvests, or like they're not individual animals, and that makes it hard for people to connect with them, to
Yeah.
feel for their suffering, but also for the destruction of their habitat. So
yeah, and look like how crazy 99% of all lives lost represent 2% of the calories we eat. That's shocking, right? And we don't know that. People don't know that. We need to learn, make people learn that. Yeah.
Yes, I think it's very important to give a story to these numbers, because I think sometimes we can also get drowned in statistics in general, not only in our work, but in general as humans, we get drowned in these numbers, and people don't really connect to numbers that well. So we need to find kind of that segue of like, yes, this distraction represents this percentage, but also this is what it means in reality for you. So that's always a difficult connection that we have to do as advocates. And Brian, I would love to hear your perspective, especially because you are in the media and you have kind of a different side of how we look at things as advocates. You're muted right now. No, I can't hear you. Sorry. Is it just me? Does anyone hear? Okay. No, you're muted. Maybe
I figured it out. Yay. I was asking if you could unmute me. Sorry.
oh, okay, I did not.
Apologies about that.
Sorry.
We'd be bad at charades if we were to play together. You know, I think the where I come from, yeah, so first of all, I want to say the stories is really important. I think that when we're speaking to audiences, we really need to think about how to tell stories in general. And if we can tell stories that connect with people about what they care about, that's really important. So, for example, I often meet people who don't care about animals. They certainly don't care about fish, but they do find it really gross when I mention that there's like lice that's often and other like parasites growing in our aquacultures, and that they're like, really, that's disgusting. I'm like, yeah, you should cut back on that. That works. So like I would love for them to change their mind about animals, but sometimes we just have to acknowledge that for whatever reason, people care about certain things that we don't care about as much. And it's important to lean into those motivations. You know, I think some people would say that I have a cynical perspective, but for me, it's really just it's a realistic one. I think it's important to understand humanity for what it is. And I think if our entire efforts are centered around education, while important and should be a part of the experience for sure, as someone who is an educator and as my primary tactic, I think that we're going to be in deep trouble. I think it's important to recognize that on average, humanity is not great. That's my perspective. And in order for us to change humanity, we have to think about what it is that humanity cares about. And so, for example, if we can find ways to make fish more expensive, particularly in high-income countries, that's great. If we can hold polluters accountable and make it more expensive to farm fish or take fish out of the ocean, that's potentially a potential route. If we can create alternatives, such that we'll be speaking about later, if I understand, like plant-based and cell-cultivated fish products. And yes, of course, education and media and reaching students in schools and so on. But I think it's important that we not get too excited about one particular tactic and understand that this is going to require a portfolio of approaches. So that's my take on that.
Yes, that's definitely something that sometimes we struggle with as an advocacy movement, where we maybe marry ourselves to one specific campaign or strategy because we feel that that's the most impactful or the most efficient. But I think there's so much nuance specifically with the seafood industry, and it's what we kind of struggle with every day, that it's not just one solution for the problems that we all face, because it's very different. Like we see that the industry in Indonesia is very different than what it looks like in Brazil, and both are global South countries facing similar situations, but it is very different depending on the context, and the solutions need to look different as well. So I think that's something that we need to be aware of. And like you say, Brian, I also believe that education is very important, but I feel that sometimes there's a disconnect between that and action. So it's people know what's going on. A lot of people understand the issues that we're facing with climate change and with, environmental destruction, but sometimes every day people just don't know what to do about it, and they just go about their everyday lives. They like have to work, they have to use their cars, they have to get food. And I see that a lot here. I live in Mexico City, for those that don't know me, and you see it here. Like, you walk around the streets in Mexico City and what you see is meat stands, like meat taco stands, and that's what people can eat when they're going to work. So we're not giving people kind of options, even if they want to be more sustainable in their everyday choices. It's sometimes hard to translate that into action. So I think that's also something we need to consider, just like bridging that gap between knowledge and action for people, because some people do want to make a change, they just don't know how. But yeah, interesting discussion. Could talk about this for hours, but we only have a few minutes left before we take a little break and head towards the next panel. So maybe a final thought, if you can kind of summarize in your perspective, what are the most kind of pressing actions or policy changes, consumer actions, or industry changes that you in your field of work would like to see in the maybe next few years, and how you think that could, improve the situation? So maybe let's go the way around. Brian, do you want to start?
Tough question. Yeah, I mean, for me, again, but I'll be brief because I'll probably be repetitive. I really think about this portfolio of strategies. One thing I'll say that maybe hasn't been touched on as much is that I really do want more people working in this movement. I want people thinking about these issues beyond their diet. And so I think, I want people to cut back on animal products. I want people to be vegan, but you don't have to do either of those things in order to be a part of this movement. You can donate your money. You can talk to your politician. You can start a nonprofit. You can start a plant-based seafood company. So there's a whole portfolio of ways to get involved. And from my perspective, we don't have enough people that are working in the space, particularly on the sea animals component. And so I really hope that in the coming years, we see more activity and more support, more funding, and so on, because of all the speakers have noted. The amount of environmental degradation, animal cruelty, and just plain suffering that exists in the seafood and sea animal industry is enormous, presumably much larger even than the amount in the land-based one, because of the volume of animals that are impacted. So thanks again for having me and for this question, and it's really been great.
Thank you so much, Brian. Nathalie, do you want to try to share your perspective?
Yes, I believe what I wanted to leave as a final message is how much we need to debunk some assumptions in culture about the way we eat, right? And that's, I think, what we all have to have as a responsibility, being human beings on this earth that is definitely putting a lot of impact on the earth, is where is my food coming from? Is it really worth it, the impact that the food has? And, numbers we brought here, and, there is a question here that I want to just briefly respond, and that's my message that I want to give to people. Yes, we are consuming more fish as a population as a whole, but we are also consuming more fish individually, and we are doing so holding on to impressions such as culture or such as health. When you immerse into that, you understand that no, it is not true that fish only provides health. We can actually find health in everything that is provided by other sources of protein, especially plant-based protein. Actually, fish is very contaminated right now, and we need to talk about that in terms of plastic pollution in fish, but also heavy metals in fish. We also need to debunk the cultural assumption that we always ate fish and we have to eat fish. Well, we are in a moment that in Japan, Japanese food was created as a huge cultural source of food for a lot of people that eat sushi everywhere in the world right now. That's not cultural at all. There was a huge marketing movement from the Norwegian salmon industry, very relatively new, and we need to overcome that. So let's embrace our role as a human being in this world and understand where our food is coming from, understand that there are assumptions that are very, very plainly wrong, and that is bringing us to the brink of extinction. So that's the message I want to leave to people right now. Question everything and make a research. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Nathalie. Yeah, so important to kind of know what impact your lifestyle has. Ita, do you want to answer this question?
Yes, sure. This is very interesting from Brian and Nathalie as well. I would like to add, for the sustainable consumption, it does need the sustainable production as well. So those, I hope that in the future still this kind of the awareness still keep going on, because future generation, we still have to educate it. As Catalina mentioned, education, the keyword is education, I think, tonight. And also, as I mentioned, from upstream to downstream production to consumptions need to be sustainable. And also we hope that more strengthen the collaborations among the stakeholders to have the sustainable seafood supply chain and also seafood consumption, not only in the fisheries sector itself, but we need other sectors as well, the finance sectors, the logistic, etc. Thanks, Catalina.
Thank you so much, Ita, for your participation and your input. And finally, Amelia, anything you want to share with everybody?
Yeah, definitely. It's nice to go last. Great to hear everyone else's answers as well. Yeah, I think for me, it would be really to challenge that narrative that we hear from the aquaculture industry around that their growth is relieving the burden on ocean life, when we know when it's carnivorous fish that their expansion is also leading to the expansion on catching more wild fish to feed their like salmon, for example. So I think thinking about things like more challenging the model of carnivorous fish farming generally is a shift I'd love to see in policy in general. I think, yeah, and I've put in the question answer, but we have an academic paper that our lead researcher was published in 2022, thinking about different ways we could model the fish, like the fish that we eat and how we farm stuff. Like, for example, incorporating in mussels and unfed aquaculture, or yeah, different ways of doing it. So yeah, you can have a look at the link there. Yeah, just challenging the wider models of, I think, was something I'd like to see shift.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's just like participating in those conversations and putting the topic on the table is like our first job, and it's what we work for, but we hope that it gathers momentum quickly and we can start seeing very positive change, thanks to the work that all of you and many others are doing. So thank you so much to all our panelists and for the audience for joining us and asking such insightful questions. We are sorry we can't answer all of them, but we will kind of try to share more information about these topics after the conference, if we have the opportunity. And we should probably give a few minutes break. I think we're supposed to start in a minute, but maybe people need to stand up, get some water or coffee. So our panelists for the next panel, titled Refine, are joining. So please stay tuned, and thank you all so much.